Welcome to Shift, everybody. So glad to see you. If this is your first time here, you can scan this QR code, and if you fill out the Connect card, we'll send you some free Opus coffee. And if you click the Coffee with Joe section, he can meet you either in person or online for that cup of Joe. We only have 2 services left until the big move, and we need your help. You can scan this QR code or any of the other ones in the building and sign up to become a part of our move team. We're gonna be meeting here on Sunday the 28th at 10:30 a.m., packing everything up and going to the new building, which is located at 1521 Northwest 34th Street. We're renting the space from Westminster Presbyterian Church, so come on and help, and you'll get to see the new space. Our small groups will be launching in February this semester, so you can scan this QR code to go ahead and start signing up. And this year, we'll be having a in-person group, a Zoom group, a games group, a student group, and a first magnitude group. A first magnitude group. They will be meeting on the first and third Fridays of the month to hang out and have some fun. So make sure you watch out for more details. Mark your calendars for the 21st. We're gonna be having our next all-shift meeting right after service, and we're gonna be going over all the fun finance stuff just to keep you guys informed and going over any last details before the big move. And anyone is welcome to stay and be a part. And that's all I have for you guys today. So let's jump into week 2 of Reconnect.
It is often joked that Jesus' greatest miracle was having 12 close friends in his 30s, right? I think that we can all, we laugh because it's true, and we can recognize that as we get to be adults, it's hard to find good friends, right? When Tori and I started finding our people, and it took years, but when we started finding our people, it was weird. We would literally have conversations about whether these people really liked us for us. Could we be ourselves around them, or did we still need to play our roles like as pastor and pastor's wife? Believe it or not, there are a lot of people in the church that are so power hungry that they will latch onto anybody that they perceive as having power, namely like staff or staff families. And big or small, it doesn't matter what size the church, big or small, they're always there. So we never really knew what people or which people actually liked us for us, or they liked us because of our position. And I can remember a particular time, Tori and I were we were getting ready to go hang out or go have dinner or something with somebody. And I don't remember exactly what we were talking about. I don't remember the specific conversation, but I do remember telling Tori, no, we don't have to do that anymore. You don't have to do that. You don't have to put on your customer service voice, right? You don't have to do that anymore because these people like us. We can go to dinner, we can be ourselves, and they're still going to like us. And guess what? They did. Wow. People liked us, right? You like me. And then we found more people, right? And then we found people outside of the church. I know, right? Friends that love heavy metal as much as I do, and most that don't, right? Friends that have become like second parents to our kids. Some friends, just a handful of them, like to play Dungeons and Dragons like I do. Most don't. All right, those are not her friends. But just to clarify. But I will say that these new friendships that we've cultivated over the last few years have been some of the most meaningful and deepest relationships of our lives. They have become chosen family to us, and our lives wouldn't be the same if they weren't part of it. I want to welcome you to Shift. If you're new, my name is Joe. I'm the lead pastor. And so whether you're here in person or watching on the stream, if you're new, I would love to meet you. So check that box in the digital Connect card, or just hit me up, and I'd love to meet you for coffee. We are in a series. We're kicking the year off with this idea of reconnecting, right? Of reconnecting to these things that, like parts of our faith that we thought were gone, right? Or at least I did. I didn't know that I would regain them. And so we're talking about reconnecting. Last week, we looked at the idea of reconnecting to God. And if you weren't here, didn't listen, I encourage you to go back and watch that or listen to it, because it's kind of the basis for all of this. Next week, we're going to be talking about what it means to reconnect with the church, and we're going to be talking about that, but also our next steps. And then, for today, we're talking about reconnecting with each other. Now, I don't know if any of you can relate to what I kicked it off with, this idea of like, will they or won't they like me? Maybe you can. But I think all of us have experienced that stuff like within a church setting, right? Of believing that you had these real friends and real relationships within the church, only to find out that they were rooted in something other than you, right? That these friendships and relationships that we thought were so rock solid turned out not to be once you didn't attend, right? Or something happened, or you asked too many questions, or just kind of fill in the blank, right? They just almost instantly vanished. It's people you've known for years. Realizing that they weren't actual friends, but church friends is difficult. And I think it's even more difficult when you begin to understand that it's not necessarily that individual's fault, but it's the entire system that sets that up, right? The entire system, the whole thing creates that manipulation. And so much of the modern American church system is just inherently manipulative. And I don't think it started that way. As author Eric Hoffer, in his book, The Temper of Our Time, he said this: every great cause begins as a movement, becomes a business, and eventually degenerates into a racket. And we get to be in the racket end of stuff. I feel that that's where we are. Now, I will say that one of the things that I'm working hard on is not dwelling in what was wrong, but in moving forward in a healthier way, right? However, there are times that the only way we can move forward is to look back at what was wrong in the first place. For us to be willing to admit that we were wrong, and I don't mean you as an individual when I say we, I mean we, like capital C church, were wrong, and only then can we take those healthy steps forward. So to start reconnecting with each other, I think the first thing that we have to do is we have to change our expectations. Growing up in church, there was a lot of church stuff to do, right? Like I had Sunday school. This is just normal. I had Sunday school, then Sunday church, right? Then Sunday night church. And then we had Wednesday night church. There were always like church rehearsals for something, right? Like a choir or a play or whatever. Then you had the meetings that went along with whatever. And then on some Saturdays, I don't remember which Saturday in the month, but we always went door to door on Saturday mornings, which is always great, right? Because everybody loves that. We were always welcomed, like so happy to see you at 9 o'clock on Saturday. Thank you for knocking on my door. There were Super Bowl parties, there were New Year's Eve parties, there were movie nights, there were lock-ins, camps, all right? That's all just like the normal church calendar. But working in the church was even worse at times. There were weeks where I was literally gone 5 nights a week on top of my office hours. It was a point where Tori and I were just like passing each other in the evenings. We might get to have dinner together. And it was like, okay, I'll see you later, babe. And that was one of the reasons why I quit the church for a while. But we did all of those things because we wanted to build this thing called what we thought was community, right? We took, and I say we as the church, we took what naturally occurs in life and the culture that we read about in the first century, like the first church culture. And we took all of that just happened and we tried to manipulate it and tried to manufacture it. And we took verses like this one. This is said all the time. It's in Hebrews 10:25, and it says, "And let us not neglect our meeting together as some people do, but encourage one another, especially now that the day of his return is drawing near." Just as an aside, that was written 2,000 years ago. We try to read it into now as near, his time is drawing near. No, it's not. Like, they wrote that 2,000 years ago, and it wasn't near then, and I don't think it's near now, all right? But that verse is used, right, and said, well, you got to show up. You can't neglect. You got to be at everything. And then we as a staff, we took verses just like that, and we just kind of like extrapolated it out to mean more and more church programming. Now, are any of those things inherently wrong? No. A lot of them were fun. I had a good time at a lot of that stuff, and I have very fond memories of many of those things. But when it becomes the only way to build community, it becomes incredibly unhealthy. Stop expecting the church to be your only community. Bet you've never heard that in a sermon, huh? But it's true. It's true. It can be part of your community, but it cannot be your only source of community. It just can't. Most friendships and relationships within the church are built on one thing: right belief. You may find that you have things in common outside of the church system, but the foundation is this shared belief in a certain set of doctrines. But what happens when you challenge those doctrines, or God forbid, you change your opinion on those doctrines? Your entire friend group disappears, and it's not healthy. Again, I don't think it started as a way to control people, but it certainly turned into that. Like if there's enough programs, enough small groups, enough events that we become your entertainment director, then we have you. Your entire social life revolves around the church and church programming. And can you see how cult-like that can become? Everything is tied to the religious institution. And if everything is tied to the religious institution, then we control what you think and believe, because the moment you begin to step outside whatever we have determined is orthodoxy, we can threaten to take all of that away. And so what do most people do? They get back in line. Anybody experience that? So hear me when I say this: you cannot make Shift your only place of community. You can't. If it is, I'm going to challenge you to step outside of that bubble and push yourself to find other avenues to connect with people. So you have to change your expectations. I want to show you a picture. Can you go ahead and show that? That is Finn, our family dog, with my oldest and the youngest. My only two. That made it sound like I had some in between. That's it. That's all. Those are my only two. They're like, we're the other kids. That's it. That's all the kids. This is the day that we adopted Finn and took him home. And he is a very good boy, as you can see. And one of the most favorite things that I did with him until my daughter moved out and took him from us. One of the things that I love doing with him is taking him on our evening walks. We would often walk for like an hour or more. And if you have a dog, you know this, but you begin to meet other people that also walk their dogs at the same time. And you at first it's just kind of cordial. You like say hi, and they say hi, and the dogs sniff each other, and then you move on. And then eventually you begin to learn names. You always learn the dog's name first before you know the human's name, right? But eventually you start to get to know each other, and you start talking more. And because it's a daily routine, you start becoming friends, right? Well, on my walks, I would run into this older woman named, we'll call her Olivia, all right? And Olivia was this just awesome person. Her and her husband were retired. They were both parents and grandparents. They were both very successful business people, and they both really enjoyed traveling and stuff. And so they had just led this super interesting life. And so we talked about all kinds of stuff and found that we had a lot in common. And so when we would run into each other, we just ended up walking together. And we talked about, just anything and everything, whatever was going on, whatever was happening with politics or movies or books or her kids or my kids. We just ended up talking about a ton of stuff. But here's where it gets gross. Here's where it gets gross. You knew something was off, right? This was in the dying days of Evangelical Joe, all right? I was the lead pastor of a conservative evangelical church here in town. And while I was at the very beginning of what turned into a very deep deconstruction, I was still clinging to those old structures for my dear life. And while we walked and talked, I would look and think and plot for ways to bring God into the conversation. All right. I was listening to what she was saying, but not really, because I thought if I could earn her trust, I could invite her to church. I know. Listen, I know. And honestly, listen, there's nothing wrong with inviting someone to something that you feel brings you joy or brings you life or brings you fulfillment, right? There's nothing wrong with inviting somebody to that thing, whatever that thing is. but only if you're upfront with it, all right? And I was not. I was the stay-at-home evangelical mom that is part of a multi-level marketing scheme that comes up with interactive posts on Facebook to increase engagement so they can eventually invite you over for coffee, but really it's a sales pitch. And for only $2.95, you can get this starter kit, but don't worry, you'll make it back almost immediately. And if you start developing your downline, you can start earning enough to retire your husband. If we're going to reconnect with each other, we have to do the work. We have to do the work of undoing so much internally. All of our relationships, if you grew up in the church or spent any time in the church at all of our relationships were for one thing and one thing only: saving souls. Anybody remember that? That's what it was for. You go out there and you make friends with people so that you can save their soul. But how can you truly love someone if there's always an agenda? There's always an agenda. How can we really love somebody if we always see them as a project, as something to be won and not a person? As staff, we literally had to teach people from the stage on how to be friends with somebody that wouldn't accept an invitation. You know why we had to teach them? Because you can't be friends with somebody if the entire reason is you want to sell them something. You can't be their friend. Now, I don't know what that looks like for you to do that internal work. But I think we all have to agree, we all have to admit that to go forward, we have to confront things within ourselves if we're going to build healthy relationships. For some of us, that can literally be as simple as like recognize it, maybe reading something, maybe listening to a podcast, right? It's just simple steps. For some of us, it goes much deeper, and there's going to be counseling and therapy. And for others, it's probably going to be somewhere in between. But it will look different for different people, but the truth remains, to reconnect with each other, we're going to have to do some work. And there are lots of things that I could talk about on this topic. Right? We could go in a ton of different directions, but I want to end with what I think is maybe the most misused and abused aspect of church relationships: authenticity. I think that one of the ways to reconnect with each other is that we have to seek like real authenticity. Churches used to love to use those words, right? Like, just come as you are. We're real. Right? We're about authenticity, right? We're just stripped down. I mean, there's all kinds of buzzwords that churches love to use. And I know, like, coming from experience, like, we truly believed those things. Like, when I was in the thick of my evangelical fundamentalist self, I truly believed that we were being those things. And not only that, but that friendships outside of the church were shallow. I believe that. I can remember saying and teaching that, you know, those friendships out there, you can just go and you can hang out and you can drink and have fun. But those kinds of relationships don't ask anything of you. They don't require anything of you. Because that's what it means to be friends here. It has to be hard, right? I thought if you were truly going to have community, like real friendships, it meant confession and sacrifice. Doesn't that sound fun? Anybody want to come over for football and confession and sacrifice? It meant, in my head then, and for all of us in that space, it meant I had to be real and authentic, and that meant confessing sins to those in my community. But all that did was like create this fragile system that was always on the brink of falling apart, because the question was, will they accept me or won't they accept me? That was always in the balance. And it was this burden. Like, I don't know if you guys were in this space, but trust me when I say this, it was this burden of constant openness and vulnerability, where the confessing of sins seemed never ending. There was always something to confess, but all that did was teach you which sins are okay to confess and which sins are not okay to confess. Because some sins you can confess and then you would be applauded. You'd be lifted up and like, oh, look, they're so holy. And everybody would be like, yay. And, you know, it would reinforce the cult behavior. But some sins, whoa, boy, if you brought those things up, not only would you worry about them accepting you, but you also had to worry about, am I going to be allowed to come back? So it created this like tiered system of what I can confess and what I can't. it also creates this system where because we are called by God to confess and to forgive, it forced us to forgive abusers. Because confession and forgiveness, right? You have to forgive them. That's what it says. And so you have to forgive the abuser, which also comes with a caveat of access back into your life, whether you want it or not. That's what real community looked like. That's what bearing each other's burdens was supposed to look like. It's hard because it's true. But what does that produce? What does that produce? In Matthew 7, Jesus talks about, this is one of our core verses here, talks about how you can judge false teachers. And I believe you can apply this not only to like people, but I think you can also apply it to like organizations, right? It says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Orthopraxy, right practice. All right, isn't that interesting that Jesus said that? Are groups gathered from thorns or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree produces good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. And a good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Tom and Susie, obviously not their real names, were two of the best adult volunteers that I ever had. They loved the teens in the student ministry where I was so well. When Tori and I were interviewed for that church, Tom was on the search committee, and like the questions that he had for us and the way that he was just like super protective of those kids, you could tell that he really like treated those kids like as his own. And Susie came to us a few years later, but she quickly became like a very crucial part to the student ministry. They were fun. Like they loved to laugh and to kid around. They loved God and they loved teens. They literally had everything you wanted in an adult volunteer for student ministry. Unfortunately, they both had the one thing that wasn't valued as much as it should have been: honesty. They were honest. What you saw is what you got. If you asked them how they were, they told you. Honestly. There was no pretending. There was no pretense. And the church did not honor that. It was very much a make sure you're smiling and everything is great when you walk through the door church. Does that make sense? And the more honest they were about things, the more heat they got from leadership. They wouldn't conform to the culture that the elders wanted. They wanted us to have everything put together to be role models. Right? Like they wanted us to always be coming from a position of strength, and that's not realistic. Tom and Susie were eventually pushed out, not just out of the student ministry, but out of the church. And it is one of my biggest regrets that I did not at the time know how to fight for them. If we are to take the words of Jesus seriously, then we must conclude that the system that we have creates scenarios just like this. It's inevitable. We'll be talking about this more next week as far as the church goes, so I don't want to dwell here too long, but it's these teachings and practices inside the church. That's the soil where these bad trees grow. Real authenticity means that I can show up, that you can show up as my authentic self and still find love and acceptance and understanding. I don't have to believe the same way as you or think the same way as you to still receive that. And do you know how foreign that was to me? That idea? Like I had never experienced that before. The first time I ever experienced that, I've mentioned this before, but that I never experienced that until I started working at this super amazing but now closed gym called Burn Boot Camp. I met people from all over the spectrum, people on the right and people on the left, religious, non-religious, queer, straight, black, white, everything in between. And of course, some people got along better than they did with others. I mean, that's the way it's going to be, right? But there was this very real and tangible authenticity that had never come across before. Like I told Tori many times that like the people of this gym act like the church way better than the people in the church. Like they don't even know it, and they're doing things that we're supposed to do. Like that's just how it was. And people ask questions. Not because they wanted to argue, right? And not because they wanted you to conform to something, but because they genuinely wanted to know. They wanted to understand something. And there were some real conversations that happened in that space. Like there was 45 minutes of working out, but before and after, all these conversations took place. And then that created these relationships outside of that 45 minutes. But I can remember there was a time period, the summer of 2020. There was some real conversations that were being had. After the murders of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, there were some real discussions. We had police officers as part of our community. We had police families as part of our community. We had people of color as part of that community, and then people like me who never really had to deal with it before. Sometimes those conversations got heated, and sometimes tempers could come to the surface. But the one of the things that I appreciated the most about those conversations was the seeking to understand. Everybody seeking to understand. No matter how sensitive the topic was, everybody was trying to see where everybody else was coming from. I have never had to watch my spouse walk out the door and wonder if I'm ever going to see them again. I've never put on a uniform and wondered if my kids are going to have a dad, right? Will I make it home? I've never been a black parent and had to have the conversation with my son about what to do and what not to do if they're pulled over, and praying that if they do, they're pulled over by one of the good guys. I've never been a black man who's walked into a store and raised suspicion for just being a black man. Can you find that in some church spaces? Maybe, but I never did. It allowed for real authenticity, that space. And because of that, I heard from people who experienced all of those things and more. It helped me grow as a person. It helped me see from perspectives that I will never have. It made me a better person, and I learned what it means to treat others the way that I would want to be treated, because I heard it, right? I knew them. Real authenticity allows you to show up as yourself in a space without worry of belonging. So if any of you, I know here in this space, this doesn't apply to you if you're sitting here in this space, but if you're watching on the stream or you're watching on the live and you're someplace not here and you're like, I don't think that's real, try it. Are you? Disagree. Pick one of the teachings of the church and disagree with it and see where it gets you. You might get away with it a few times, but if you keep pushing, if you keep asking questions, you're going to end up outside. But true authenticity allows you to be you because you make that better, or you make that place better. It's hard making friends as an adult, right? It's hard reconnecting, and as people coming out of high control fundamentalist places, finding new ways to cultivate real friendships, deep friendships, can be even more of a challenge, because the whole way that we were taught to do it has to go. It means that we have to change our expectations. Church is one easy way to find friendships, but it can't be the only way, right? And then we have to do the work to move forward. We have to do the work of undoing what it means to be friends, because friendships can't be based on manipulation. I can't be trying to sell you something, and I can't see you as a project. We have to do the work of undoing that. And we need to expect and demand real authenticity, not a systemized, not a manufactured authenticity based on everyone believing the same place or the same thing. Find a place where you are free to be you in all of your you-ness, right? No more and no less. If you're new with us, we end every week with a time of reflection. And so right now what we want to do is we want to take a moment to stop and recognize what our bodies are telling us. Listen to what God is bringing forward. And I'll ask a few questions and give you time to think on those responses. And at the end, I'll pray for us, and then we'll end, after that prayer, we'll end with a time of communion. And communion is a representation of the sacred mystery of incarnation, of God's enfleshment. And it calls us to remember the healing Jesus accomplished. And we believe that this symbolic meal and table is open and for all who are willing. So my first question for you today is this. As you were thinking through all of these things, what came up? Was it an emotion? Was it a memory? And then whatever that was that came up, how did that make you feel? My next question is, what work do you need to do? Or what work do you need to continue to do? And then whatever that is, how does that look moving forward? The final question I have for you today is, what can you let go of that you've been carrying that will help you in building these kinds of relationships? Let's pray. God of light and love, thank you for this time together. Or not. God of light and love, thank you for this time together, for this place that we have built and worked so hard for the ways it and you enrich our lives. I think that I ask that each of us would do the internal work of recognizing where we've been misled and then working to undo that. Give us the self-awareness we need to move forward and the courage to be vulnerable again. I pray that this community would honor things like honesty and allow for mourning and grief as much as joy and celebration. Help us to create a better path going forward. And thank you for how you showed us to truly love others, how to treat people. I pray that each day we are again born from above. And we thank you for willingly laying your life down and exposing the violence within our systems of power. Lord, in this moment, remind us of the healing work of the cross and the liberation that comes from Christ's resurrection. In your name we pray. Amen.